Static hisses from the radio. One word lingers, misread, then the altimeter plummets. March 31, 1989, 8:22 p.m. Guarulhos International Airport, Sao Paulo. VARIG Flight 254, a Boeing 737-200 taxis onto runway 09R. Captain Joaquim Silva double checks the flight plan, eyes flicking over instruments bathed in cockpit light. The tower gives the takeoff clearance. The engines spool up. The aircraft thrusts forward, then silence. 74 souls aboard. A 737 races down a wet runway, tires flinging spray. The aircraft lifts, landing lights flicker once, twice, then vanish into darkness. Flight 254. The cockpit, a flash of confusion. A nav display flashing a heading that shouldn't have been there. The crew got clearance for Cuiabá, yet something was off. The ATC instruction got misread. Rather than turning right onto the published airway, the jet kept straight into the Amazon, a radar blip drifting off course, a red line slicing through dense green on a map, a silent alarm echoing in the tower. The final transmission stayed calm. VARIG 254 cleared to Cuiabá, report 10,000 feet. No answer. The aircraft kept heading northwest, straight into the jungle. The night swallowed it whole. In the tower, controllers stared at the screen. The blip vanished. No distress call, no mayday, just gone. 8 days later. The wreckage located. 13 bodies recovered, the rest never. One misread, a navigational slip, a heading that led straight into darkness. How could a single wrong turn up there cause this? Aerial footage of the Amazon canopy, broken only by jagged metal. The jungle reclaiming the wreckage. Brazil's National Civil Aviation Authority later noted the crew relied on an outdated Cuiabá approach chart. A 150-mile navigation blunder, no terrain awareness tools to warn them. A system that missed the mistake before it became irreversible. Source: ANAC Investigation Report RI 1989-11-3. The cockpit voice recorder later exposed the moment of doubt, a hesitation, an unasked question, a heading that shouldn't have been taken. The plane's flight path overlaid on a map, a straight line from Sao Paulo into the jungle. A red X pinpoints the crash site. The ICAO later flagged systemic flaws in Brazil's ATC, missing standardized phraseology, weak oversight for remote ops, training gaps, communication breakdowns. Source: ICAO Accident Summary Report 1990. The NTSB, after years of wreckage analysis, pointed to a cascade of human errors: a misread clearance, a chart mismatched to the terrain, a night with no visual cues, a plane flying blind, a close-up of a worn VOR-DME chart, the Cuiabá approach circled in faded ink. The chart's date months old. Source: NTSB Accident Report via FAA translation. The Amazon in 1989 was a different beast. Less mapped, more perilous. Deforestation hadn't yet erased the landmarks pilots counted on. Today, over 20% of the original forest is gone. Back then, the jungle was a maze with no GPS to steer them out. A 1989 satellite image of the Amazon, dense and unbroken. A red dot marks where Flight 254 fell. The question lingers: why didn't anyone catch the error before it was too late? The tower didn't, the crew didn't, the system didn't. One misread, one hesitation, one decision that sent 74 souls into darkness. The wreckage half engulfed by vines, a child's shoe untouched for decades, a cockpit instrument panel twisted and blackened. Investigators would label it a navigational error compounded by miscommunication. Yet the word haunting the transcripts is simpler: misread, misread the clearance, misread the chart. Misread the night. The families never got closure. Aviation changed its procedures and the jungle kept its secret until the wreckage handed it back. But the real question remains unanswered. How does one misread decision become a tragedy? The camera pulls back from the crash site. The jungle closes in. The screen fades to black. This is SISTMA dark, the systems behind the disasters. That September 30th night in 1989 started like just another quiet hop for VARIG 737-200, ordinary, predictable, the kind of flight crews do without thinking twice. But one little slip after another piled up, until the whole thing spun into a tragedy that still haunts Brazil's aviation world. Old VARIG instructors who trained pilots back then say the program barely scratched the surface of instrument flying. They called it basic VOR navigation, period, with almost no drilling on how to double-check multiple sources. Sounds an awful lot like what the NTSB later wrote up in their report. The crew just didn't have the situational awareness to see how badly the approach was unraveling. Source: NTSB Accident Report. At 2:15 UTC, the captain cracked open a navigation chart that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. The paper was yellowed, dog-eared, and still showed the VOR-DME approach to Cuiabá, even though the crew had already gotten a different clearance hours earlier. The symbols used to pop against the dense Amazon green, but now they just blurred into the endless treetops below. Trusting that dusty sheet, the pilots dialed in a heading of 280 degrees, way off the 60 degrees they'd been cleared for. The flight data recorder later proved it. The plane kept that wrong heading for the next 200 miles like it was glued there. Source: NTSB Accident Report. Meanwhile, down in the control room, Brazilian air traffic was already fighting its own quiet battle. The ICAO folks summed it up bluntly: phraseology that wasn't standardized in training for pilots who flew into the bush that was basically non-existent. Source: ICAO Accident Summary Report. If you pull up ATC tapes from 1975 to 1995, you see the misunderstandings stacking up: misheard clearances, sloppy readbacks, altitude changes that got lost in the static, especially on those routes slicing through the Amazon where nobody was really watching. Exact numbers hard to pin down. But the trend was unmistakable: farther from the big airports meant a higher chance that somebody would drop the ball. Throw in the Amazon's weird magnetic hiccups and things got even trickier. You can get 3 degrees of deviation in just a few hundred kilometers, one geophysicist told us, without constantly checking the VOR radials against the compass. That heading could drift and nobody would notice. Flight 254's crew never did the cross-check, so the 280 degrees stayed locked in. Then there was the lack of modern gadgets. The ANAC team later wrote that the crew's reliance on that ancient chart created a 150-mile navigational blunder, and there wasn't a terrain awareness system to slap the pilots in the face and say, "Hey, you're about to fly into a mountain." Source: ANAC Investigation Report. Back in '89, that kind of alarm just didn't exist yet. By the time the jet wandered into Brazilian airspace near Marabá, controllers tried to fix it. They told the crew, "Turn left heading 060. But the captain heard it as confirmation that his 280 degrees heading was correct. That's the kind of mix-up that happens when phraseology isn't crystal clear. When the controller repeated himself, "Repeat, heading 060, nobody reacted and the plane kept trucking along its wrong path. The flight data recorder told the final, ugly story. From 2:30 to 3:12 UTC, the cockpit was calm, routine chatter, fuel good, instruments normal, while the autopilot dutifully kept the jet on 280 degrees. Then at 3:15 UTC you hear a sudden climb, followed by an even sharper drop as the Amazon rose up to meet the airplane. After the crash, the NTSB laid it out plain: a navigational blunder, a misread clearance, and zero situational awareness." Source: NTSB Accident Report. ICAO piled on, calling it a wake-up call for Brazil's ATC culture, demanding tighter phraseology rules and better training for pilots flying into the sticks. Source: ICAO Accident Summary Report. Out of the wreckage came new rules: fresh charts only, mandatory cross-checks before heading changes, and terrain awareness systems bolted onto every domestic jet. Too little, too late for the 138 people on board, but enough to keep the next generation of flights from repeating the same mistakes. Step back and you see 3 human mistakes: training that skipped the hard stuff, controllers talking past each other, and a compass that nobody bothered to double-check, all colliding at once. Alone, any one of them might have been survivable. Together, they wiped out every margin for error. Flight 254 isn't just a story about one bad night. It's proof that safety isn't some checkbox you tick. It's a web of habits, tools, and unspoken rules. When any thread frays, the whole thing can come crashing down. Now let's shift gears and see how those investigation findings actually rewrote pilot school curricula and ATC playbooks, and whether today's skies are really safer because of it. In the dead of night, the camera catches the thick Amazon canopy streaking beneath a low-flying Boeing 737. At 5:55 p.m., local on September 3, 1989, VARIG Flight 254 dropped beneath a fragmented cloud ceiling, keeping its wings level and airspeed steady. The pilots thought they were on the final approach to Cuiabá. They were in fact nowhere near it. One wingtip clipped the nearest trees. Branches ripped right through the fuselage. The aluminum screamed as it slammed into bark. The 737 skidded sideways, its wings shearing off amid a spray of sparks. The fuselage careened into the jungle, carving a roughly 200-yard scar through the trees. Fuel ignited in an instant. Fireballs burst straight through the canopy. Thick black columns of smoke rose, visible for miles around. The rescue effort quickly turned into a nightmare. The wreckage lay about 50 km from the nearest dirt road. Rain softened the laterite soil into mud. Fallen trees blocked every possible path. Local rubber tappers led the first rescue team on foot at dawn. They slogged through ankle-deep muck, machetes hacking vines, while radios stayed dead. Survivors were scattered across a 400-meter-wide debris field. 3 were pulled out alive. 9 never made it to daylight. Aerial footage now shows the burned fuselage half buried in ferns, with corrugated metal twisted around charred trunks. Within weeks, the jungle closed in, swallowing the wreckage. Official investigators finally arrived at the site 6 days later. They discovered the flight plan still clipped to the yoke. The crew had received clearance to fly a heading of 270 degrees to intercept the VOR at Cuiabá, but the controller's transmission got garbled. 0270 was heard as 0207. The crew set a heading of 20.7 degrees, a 63-degree left deviation. They ended up about 150 miles off course, deep in the Amazon. ANAC's final report filed in 1990 laid bare the sequence. Source: Brazilian National Civil Aviation Authority, ANAC investigation report. The crew's use of an outdated VORDME approach chart for the intended destination Cuiabá led to a 150-mile navigational error, exacerbated by the absence of terrain awareness tools. Deeper failures lay behind the crash. Brazilian controllers relied on non-standard phraseology. The phrase 0270 could be spoken as 270 or as 0270. The system had no cross-check to catch the misread. The crew lacked an enhanced ground proximity warning system, no GPS, no terrain database, just paper charts and a human voice echoing in a canyon of static. ICAO's review, published later that year, confirmed the systemic rot. Source: ICAO Accident Summary Report 1990. The VARIG Flight 254 accident highlighted systemic issues in Brazilian air traffic control, including lack of standardized phraseology and insufficient oversight of pilot training for remote operations. An aerial shot of the wreckage site today, overlaid with a 2021 satellite map that shows the same coordinates. The forest has regrown, the scar is now barely visible. What remains is the lesson: a missing cross-check protocol can wipe out a flight in minutes. Whether fatigue, voice distortion, any of those variables can break the chain. The Amazon swallowed Flight 254 whole, but the oversight it exposed never left, it stayed. It still flies in every cockpit that puts a little too much trust in the voice coming from the headset. Since 1989, the Amazon canopy has thinned dramatically, wiping out the river-bound silhouettes pilots once relied on as visual cues. In fact, deforestation has stripped more than 20% of the original forest cover, erasing the very landmarks that guided VAR 254's crew across a blank sky. Source: Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, INPE Deforestation Report 2021. That loss of visual references only worsened the original mistake. The crew left the published flight plan, misread the ATC clearance, and ended up about 150 miles off course. According to the NTSB, the deviation stemmed from a blend of navigational slip, ATC misinterpretation, and fading situational awareness. Source: NTSB Accident Report. Brazil's Civil Aviation Authority later pointed out that leaning on an outdated VORDME chart amplified the error, a shortcoming modern terrain awareness systems would flag today. Source: ANAC Investigation Report. In a recent interview, a Brazilian air safety regulator described how the tragedy reshaped national policy, saying, "The VARIG accident forced us to adopt ICAO-mandated phraseology standards and to institutionalize mandatory ATC pilot communication drills for remote routes." The ICAO summary adds that the crash laid bare systemic weaknesses in ATC oversight, spurring the rollout of standardized language and boosted training across the country. Source: ICAO Accident Summary Report 1990. Those reforms have saved lives, yet the fight isn't over. Today's pilots still fly corridors where the forest no longer offers a horizon, depending on electronic maps that must stay up to date. When satellite imagery lags or a ground station drops out, that same chain of errors can creep back in. We can't let history repeat itself. Support sustainable mapping projects that refresh digital charts in real time, and push for stricter ATC training standards that stress clear, unambiguous communication. Your voice matters. Advocate for policies that fund both forest conservation and modern navigation infrastructure. The Amazon sky may be in